Okay, so this will be a review of sorts of the two Ferraris added to rFactor 2, namely the 488 GTE and the 488 GT3 Evo 2020. So we'll begin by looking at the 488 GTE. So I have rFactor 2 opened here in the background, and I'm going to run a race against the AI in the 488 GTE at Le Mans. So we'll begin by running a qualifying session. The qualifying session will start at midday, and the AI will be required to do 3 laps to register a qualifying time over a period of 20 minutes. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to use time acceleration to speed through the qualifying session in order to possibly improve the performance of the AI in the actual race. Now, the results of this process will vary depending on which car and track combination you happen to be using, but I wanted to show the process for those maybe who are not aware of it, and the results of the process will prove more relevant when we do the next session with the 488 GT3. Anyway, it's a 20-minute session, timescale normal, real road is naturally progressing. The flag rules are black only. Many are commenting that the flag rules in rFactor 2 for single player, for example, are broken, so the simplest option is just to use black only. Fuel usage is normal, tyre wear is normal, mechanical failures are turned off, and invulnerability is turned on. I just want to be able to complete the race for the purposes of making this video, and I'm going to run 20 AI. And the AI settings here I got from Paul from Race Department. Paul did a video featuring the 488 GT3 prior to the launch of the car, and I happened to ask Paul what settings he was using, so he suggested these. They're not gospel, of course, as Paul said, and indeed I just wanted a baseline to test with. So I have a selection of cars added here, some GTE cars and the LMP2 Orica. So I'm going to start the session, and before I do, we can look at the race. The race starts at 2 PM. and the settings are pretty much the same. My grid position will be 21, which of course may vary depending on the results of the qualifying session. So we'll click on race. Now only this morning I moved my rFactor 2 installation from a standard mechanical hard drive to the NVMe SSD that I have in the new PC I built recently, which I did a video about, and I just wanted to see if the loading times have improved, and I think they have marginally, but don't quote me. But I guess it can't do any harm. Of course it depends on the size of the NVMe or SSD you happen to have, which in most cases will be smaller than a spinning hard drive. And I could just as easily move the title back to the spinning hard drive, but we will see how we go.
Later that same evening.
So now we're in the standing screen. I'll click on race and then I'll quickly escape the session, and I'll use my time acceleration function to enable time acceleration. You'll see the asterisk here appear at the time counter, and the AI will proceed to do their laps of the track. Now if you look at the player listing, green indicates out on track, blue will indicate in the pit lane, and white will indicate in the pit box. And you can change the cameras, so let's say go to the onboard cameras for any particular car. Or you can use the spectator cameras. And this is useful because it allows you to see how any particular car is performing at any particular track. And in this case we have the third party Ford GT, which is a payware mod, and this is running on Le Mans, which is a track developed by Studio 397 themselves. And as you can see, the car appears to be performing okay. And while the AI are running, we'll quickly look at the settings. From the controls, if you go to the camera section, you can see I have a control assigned for driving cameras, and I have a control assigned for spectator cameras. And you could also have, for example, onboard cameras, a swingman camera, and so on. And you would assign those and then save those to your controller profile. And also my car specific force feedback multiplier is at 1 right now, which is the default for my current profile. And I often reduce the multiplier for certain car and track combinations if I feel that the force feedback is too strong, but we'll leave it at 1 for now. And from the difficulty screen you can see I have every option turned off other than invulnerability and auto clutch, and this will prove more relevant later when we go to the actual race. So we've returned now to the standing screen, and as you can see most of the cars are still out on track. Now you may notice if you use this process that some of the AI may not register a qualifying time. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4 AI. Results can vary a lot. Now of course, if a particular car or track combination, if the assets are broken, using this process doesn't help, which we'll see in the next session. But you can always try it. It's no harm to try it and see if it improves the AI for you. Now we're approaching the end of the session and most of the cars have now returned to the pit box. 4 still out, or 3 at this point even. Switch to the onboard for this guy who's returning. That should be it. So now actually there's one left. So the session is now over and we can disable the time acceleration. And while I'm here, I realized I forgot to show the time acceleration option. So you go to controls, you go to miscellaneous, and if you look here, you can see time acceleration is here. And if you're using your keyboard for time acceleration, it requires a control key plus a key. In this case, it's control X. Some of the functions in rFactor 2 require this. So in this case, to assign a key, you would press a key, and then once the key is bound, you would then use control plus that key to enable the function. So we'll move on to the next session. We'll turn the time acceleration off. You'll see the asterisk disappear, and we'll move on to the next session by going to the standing screen and going to next session, which will be the race. Enter. We'll start the session. Drivers. Turn on the driver name so I can see which of the AI I need to follow. Now I'm going to turn on my traction control. Supposed to be following this guy up ahead. Let's see. Hang on a minute. That's better. Skip formation. We'll skip the formation lap. Now I have control. Drivers. Turn off the names. I don't need them for an AI race. Now you'll forgive me if I spin out at some point. I'm not the world's best sim driver, and much less when I'm trying to talk and think and drive at the same time. Indeed, I did a video recently, a review of sorts of the new Bentley added to rFactor 2. The 2020 Bentley versus the original from 2017, and somebody commented that I was 20 seconds off the pace at Zandvoort, which indeed I was, probably. So in the comments they recommended a video which was by President Smug, I think the guy's name is, and he did a 134 in the McLaren 720S at Zandvoort, which I tried in rFactor 2, and my fastest was a 141. So I did try, but I don't think 134 is happening anytime soon for me. Oops. Close to the wall. Box. Sometimes the voice controls do funky things. Status. I'll endeavour to stay on track. Actually, I debated with myself using the automatic shifters, because in the real world here we have a dual clutch car and it has the paddle shifters, but I never used them, so I thought, why not make life easier in the sim here by just letting the computer handle the shifting, which it does in the real car, but we'll click clack for now. You hear people talking about the satisfying click of a paddle shifter in the real reviews, and I don't particularly care for the sound, but anyway. Now between Paul's suggested AI settings and my slowness, I will invariably end up on my own out on track, but anyway. Now in terms of the traction control, we looked at the difficulty screen briefly there, and I did that because I've recently realized that if you have traction control set to high, medium or low, let's say high, and then you use the traction control in car as 1 or 2, which is low, the car will default to the higher setting. What you should do in that case, if you want to use the in-car controls, is disable the traction control in the difficulty screen, so basically turn everything to off and then use the in-car traction control. This was something new that I only just realized, so that's important to note perhaps. And the same would apply for ABS, anti-lock brakes, which this car, the GTE, does not have. The GT3 does, so if you see, if I try and modify the ABS, it says there isn't one available. And that should be regardless of whether you have the ABS enabled in the difficulty screen or not. Actually, that's a good point. If I have ABS in the difficulty screen, does that mean that there's ABS for the car in the game, whether the car has it or not? I don't actually know. But I suppose to have it as realistic as possible, you should technically just disable it. Now these Porsche curves are always pain in the posterior for me.
The lap was a 4:34.95.
Now on the subject of traction control, you may notice the traction control buttons on the upper left and right hand corners of the wheel, and this car should have a dual traction control system. On the left would be the traction control, and on the right would be the traction control cut, which applies a setting as to when the traction control actually kicks in. So left would be the level of traction control, and right would be when it kicks in, which is modeled in the 488 GT3 in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but it's not modeled here. And the GTE and the GT3 Ferrari should have the same, and indeed the recent 991.2 Porsche 911 should also have it. The GT3 and the GTE, I guess, and I think it's included in Assetto Corsa Competizione in the 911, but rFactor 2 doesn't have it. Now of course it's only a simulation of traction control, and who's to say that the implementation in Assetto Corsa Competizione is 100% correct either, but nevertheless, just to note that. Display, and in this HUD element here you can see the difficulty options I have enabled. So I have auto clutch on and invulnerability turned on, but everything else is turned off, and that's a handy little cue you can use to check which options you have enabled. Status. So there's just under 5 minutes left. Now the 488 GTE is a 490 brake horsepower GTE car as part of the World Endurance Championship balance of performance requirements, and the engine is a 4-litre twin turbo V8, as I completely forget my gearing. Yes, it's a 4-litre twin turbo V8, as is the GT3, and I think it's actually 3.9.6 litres rounded off to 4 if I'm not mistaken. Now I'm getting some vibration in the wheel when I'm running the GTE on the straights here at Le Mans, and I don't know what's causing that. It almost feels like the wheel is broken or something. And the GTE class at Le Mans is interesting because if anybody looked at my video about the future of Le Mans, the future of the GTE as a class is in question, I would guess. With the onset of the Le Mans hypercar rules and the LMDH, the convergence between the IMSA and the ACO when it actually happens. I mean, the beer bug, or the coof as some call it, from 2020 has obviously caused a delay. John Doonan and his team are not ready yet to commit to LMDH, at least not until 2023, I think it is. So we'll have to see how it goes, but the point being that most if not all of the LMDH and LMH cars will include hybrid on some level. So rFactor 2, if it's to remain relevant, will have to implement hybrid on some level going forward. There's 1 minute left. I'll try and navigate these Porsche curves properly. There's an art to taking these curves. Now, BMW have already left, of course, the World Endurance Championship. The M8 will remain at IMSA, and of course Ford have pulled out. You can still run the M8 at Le Mans or the Ford GT at Le Mans in rFactor 2 or any other sim that has the content, but in the real world it's not relevant anymore. So let's see what happens there. And of course rFactor 2 does not have the Corvette C8R yet either. Maybe it gets it at some point, that would be interesting. I'm getting this weird vibration in the wheel again. I don't know if the mic picks that up. You can see the on-screen wheel is also vibrating. Must be a function of the game. It's weird though. Hadn't noticed it before. Now you'll have to forgive Captain Slow here. I know this is not so interesting to look at, but overall I enjoyed the car. The car is modelled nicely. It drives okay. And the force feedback for both is okay, I guess. So this will be the last lap, I guess. Or at least it should be. Display. 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 Yeah, the race is over. Time left is 0. the voice controls are useful, but sometimes, as I said, it does do funky things. If I assign a specific word to a function and I don't say that word or something similar, it seems to enable itself for some reason. Like when I took that chicane on the muzzsaw and it decided to request a pit stop. Status. Now, try and finish this lap. I guess perhaps reducing the force feedback multiplier might help remove some of the vibrations. Although, as I said, I tend to reduce the force feedback multiplier depending on the car and track combination I'm actually running. Almost feels like I have a puncture when I'm feeling that vibration. Maybe I do. Anyway, that's the end of the session. Pause. We'll close that. And we'll leave the track and we'll move on to discussing the 488 GT3. And before moving on to the 488 GT3, I wanted to talk about the car in more detail as it relates to the original from 2016 and as it relates to the GTE. And these images I put together prior to recording the video. So on the upper left here you have the 488 GT3 from 2016 from Assetto Corsa. To the right of that you have the 2018 version, I think it is, from Assetto Corsa Competizione. On the lower left you have the GT3 Evo from rFactor 2, and to the right of that you have the 488 GTE also from rFactor 2. And you notice here at the front of the 488 GT3 from Assetto Corsa Competizione the inclusion of the additional lights, which the GT3 Evo from rFactor 2 doesn't appear to have. Now the 488 GT3 became available in 2016, as was the red pack for Assetto Corsa, which included the car on the top left. And there's a promo video on the Steam page for the red pack DLC, which states that life is too short not to be Italian, which is a good one. And the 488 GT3 is also a twin turbo 4-litre V8 with 500 to 600 brake horsepower, depending on the GT3 balance of performance specifications. The 488 GT3 Evo is an evolution of the original from 2016, and the Evo kit can be retrofitted to the existing 2016 models to bring them up to date. And the GT3 Evo features upgraded aerodynamics, a lighter chassis, an improved cabin, and supposedly better reliability. The front bumper has been redesigned to improve stability and front grip, and they've added big dive planes, which you can see here, and more vents on the wheel wells to improve airflow. As you can see here on the upper left, this is the original front fender. You can see some changes here to the version from 2018 from Assetto Corsa Competizione, and here you can see the upgraded front bumper from the 2020 Evo version with the added dive planes. And if we move on to the next image, you can see the front wheel well of the 2020 Evo. And the GT3 Evo includes redesigned doors with a tapered leading edge and a new rear spoiler. We can look at the cars in an upper 3/4 view, and you can see here I chose this livery because you can see the size of the louvers, I guess that's what they're called, to increase the airflow from the wheel wells. And if you compare those to the originals from the 2016 and 2018 builds, and as you can see here, the spoiler, the edges of the spoiler and the details of the spoiler appear to be bigger than those of the originals. And in the 488 GT3 Evo for 2020, they've added tweaks to the ABS and traction control in the ECU by Bosch, and they've made changes to the throttle mapping and gear ratios for additional torque control. And as you can see here, the rear diffuser has not been changed that much, although there are some changes on the outer edges of it. So slightly modified if you compare the images directly. And the rear diffuser for the GT3 and the GTE appear to be identical right now, other than these inner parts of the GTE rear diffuser. And as far as I can tell, both cars are identical internally. I took some capture of a rotation of the cars inside the cockpit, and they appear to be the same as far as I can tell. So I thought it would be interesting to try and compare the cars together visually to see the differences and try to understand what the Evo actually means in terms of the overall dynamics of the car. So I hope this was useful. And now we'll go back to rFactor 2 and we'll select the 488 GT3. And as you can see here, currently the amount of liveries available for the GT3 are less than those of the GTE, although the 488 GTE was published in May prior to the Virtual Le Mans in June of 2020, so they may add some additional liveries for the GT3 over time. We'll go with our Sky livery for now, and we're going to pick Watkins Glen, which is a third-party mod available from the Steam Workshop. And we're going to click remove all, and we're going to add a custom selection of GT3 cars as we try and navigate this horrible UI. Let's see, I want to add the Aston Martin, I want to add the Bentley Continental 2020, the new Bentley, I want to add the Ferrari, and I want to add the AMG and the 911 for particular reasons. So again, the same principles apply, 3 laps over a 20-minute period, and we're going to use the acceleration option. And the race again, 10-minute race with grid precision at 21, of course depending on the results of the qualifying session. So again, I'll click on race.
A lot of boring math later.
And click escape. And return to the standing screen. And then I'll enable the time acceleration. And we'll stay in spectator cam view. Now there is something fundamentally wrong with the AMG GT3 in rFactor 2, so it will spin out at Watkins Glen, which is the third-party mod, but it may also spin out at Studio 397's own tracks, and the 911 GT3 will also spin out, guaranteed. And many have been commenting that the force feedback in the AMG GT3 is broken. And the balance of the car overall appears to be broken, so it spins out like a yo-yo. or a spinning top rather. So if you're running an AI race using GT3 cars and you're not driving the AMG or 911 yourselves, just leave them out for now. Now perhaps rFactor 2 are planning to add the updated AMG GT3 or the 911, at which point those cars will be fixed. But if you've purchased the originals, those will still be there. Now I had purchased the 2017 Bentley, and because of that I received a copy of the 2020 version, but both cars are still available in my car list. So if the older one was broken, they should fix it. And the same applies here. A total mess. Now I'm running Watkins Glen here because it's a track I enjoy, and if you want to add Watkins Glen to your own selection of tracks, be sure to pick the international version, which is a conversion of the track for Assetto Corsa by Lilski. Make sure and choose that one and not the other one that's available in the workshop. And I was also going to use Lime Rock Park, which is originally an ISI track, so it's an rFactor 2 track updated by Studio 397. I tried to exit the pit box and find the pits and I couldn't find them, and when I used the auto pit function with the 488 GT3, the car ended up in a wall, which is just ridiculous. So I had to look at a random video to try and figure out where the pits were. So the session is nearly ending and everybody is already completed, and as you can see here, there's one AI which hasn't registered a qualifying time, including me, so that's 2 in this case. So I'll disable the time acceleration, let the session finish. And prior to recording the video, I'd been testing this and running some example races at Watkins Glen, and at one stage I had an AI Ferrari 488 GT3 which was pink, which is not a livery that's available, but I think that relates to issues with some cars not loading with their liveries assigned, which I have noticed from comments in race department, and indeed I have seen it occur myself. So we'll move on now to the next session, which is the race session. So I'm starting at 20 out of 21, and I said I specified 21 in the race session, but of course I start at 20 based on the results of the qualifying session. Enter. Drivers. Now I'm supposed to be following Kalikuri. I'm going to turn up the traction control again. Display. You can see here, these are the options I have enabled. Now I'm trying to find Kalikuri. There we go. Skip formation. Drivers. Turn off the driver names. Now this is a track I like. I enjoy it quite a lot. It's quite technical. I'll try and stay on circuit. As I said, I was going to run Lime Rock Park and then I decided not to. But Lime Rock Park is also a circuit I like. And I also thought of maybe running a race at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. But then I thought, well, that would be a bit too much of a challenge. And there goes the AMG, just like I said. So I was going to run the Nordschleife because at the recent ADAC 24 Hours of the Nürburgring, the Ferrari led the race. And later on, actually funnily enough, the AMG also spun out, driven by Raffaele Marciello, and which of course he's a very good driver. No comment on the real car in the real world, of course. But funnily enough, when Raffaele got into the car for his second stint, I think it was, they had changed the tyres in the pits, and one of the wheels literally came off the car. I think the right rear wheel came off the car, and he ended up in the wall, and that was the end of the race for them, which was unfortunate. And those of us of a certain vintage may know of the actor, the late Pete Postlethwaite. So every time I see Raffaele Marciello with his helmet off, I always think of a young Pete Postlethwaite. Just a random thing I thought I'd mention. Now the 488 GT3 is a 500 to 600 brake horsepower GT3 spec car, again with the 4 litre twin turbo V8 or 3.9.6 litres, whatever it is, rounded off to 4 litres. And this car includes traction control and ABS. You can see here I can assign an ABS setting if I wish to, unlike the GTE variant. This is a complete mess. Now I will allow the fact that this is a third-party mod and indeed a conversion from Assetto Corsa, but the performance of the AMG car is not acceptable. This is just ridiculous. So if you're watching Studio 397, you need to fix it. So would I recommend buying the endurance pack for rFactor 2? I would not. Would I recommend buying the Ferraris? Yes, I would. I like them. They're good. But, I think the guys still have some work to do. Status. And I have a theory that the reason the Ferraris finally got added to rFactor 2, which is something people had been waiting for, was perhaps due to the year that is 2020, namely the beer bug, and the FIA wanted to run a virtual Le Mans in June, and they weren't going to run a virtual Le Mans without having a Ferrari, obviously. So no doubt the FIA and the ACO were part of the agreement to get the license available for rFactor 2, because a license for a Ferrari is not cheap. I know that because Race Room would like to have Ferrari, but I don't think they can afford it right now, or at least come to an arrangement. That's no disrespect to the guys from Sector 3. Guess it's just a business reality. Now having the Ferraris is great, but there's no hybrid in rFactor 2. Now they have the Formula E cars, and they have the ability to trying to add this boost function, whereby you pass a section of the Formula E circuit and you get 5 or 10 seconds of boost. They're trying to implement that as a feature in the game, but I don't know how they're getting on with that, but I think they should focus maybe more on adding hybrid controls as well, because it's going to be needed. I mean, Assetto Corsa is a game from 2014. Now it's not being developed anymore, but it has the Ferrari SF17 Formula 1 car, which was added in the Ferrari pack, and it has the full implementation of the MGU system with hybrid and battery regeneration. which I featured in my Assetto Corsa getting started guide. So come on, Studio 397. Unless you want to become a classic car sim, you better get your finger out. And also add some single player content. But I have a theory as to why they don't. I think they want to become a sort of a esports or iRacing type thing. I did another video about my assumptions with rFactor 2, but I think basically Studio 397 are running as sort of a skeleton crew and sort of in maintenance mode. Now they are making content, but I don't know what their goals are. I mean, at least on a certain level here, the AMG car is broken, so for single player it's pretty much useless. I mean, people have paid for that car. It's not free. What is this? What is this? A drifting game or what?
So there was a bit of argy and, if you will, bargy.
Now, at least there was a spin that wasn't my own fault. Look at this now. This is like a Forza hopper. Ridiculous. Anyway. Let's try and focus on completing a few competitive laps. Although I may be 10 or 20 seconds behind the pace, but I don't really care, to be honest, so those people can't.
Shut the f up.
I'm only joking. I want to enjoy the simulation and I want to try and make some videos if I can. I'm not one of these esports aliens. I don't really aspire to be. And it's also about having time to practice. Indeed, Watkins Glen itself is a difficult enough circuit, or technical circuit, I guess, and it would take several laps over quite a long period to sort of master it. But it's something I would like to do, if possible. See now if we can. This is a nice, fast flowing section of the track. And up to the chicane here on the right. As I weave my way through the drifting AMGs. Up the hill. And around to the right. I guess this car requires some kind of setup to reduce the, I guess there's possible understeer here. I wouldn't really know how. That's the end of the race. So if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd also be delighted to read them below in the comment section.
Hate YouTubers, that's my pro tip.
And if you don't mind adding to your notifications, click the bell icon, as they say, and possibly also share the video with anybody who you think might be interested in checking it out. If, for example, they're interested in rFactor 2 and the associated problems. If anything, this is sort of a PSA, I guess. Started riding the curbs here. Actually have the sound of the engine dialed down and the sound of the tires dialed up so I can hear what they're doing. The drone of the engine sound is one thing, but it doesn't particularly interest me. I suppose it depends on the quality of the sound. It's something you go to race room for, I guess. So that will do it. Until next time, thank you. Destroyed.